Welcome to the Strategic Veteran, where we chart the course from service to civilian triumph. I'm Adam Peters, a veteran, entrepreneur, and your fellow navigator in the quest for a life of impact and fulfillment. My mission is simple: to empower you with the tools and stories that turn challenge into opportunity. Having walked the path from active duty to where I stand now, I understand the search for purpose that comes with hanging up the uniform. It's a path I've walked, with its trials, its tribulations, and its victories, and it's a journey we're on together. This podcast is more than just conversation. It's a beacon for those seeking to redefine our missions through entrepreneurship. It's about igniting the entrepreneurial spirit that lives within us, the spirit that compels us to create, lead, and make our mark on the world. Here we connect with veterans who have built businesses, sparked change, and found their purpose in the marketplace of ideas. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. They've transformed their service into startups, their experiences into enterprises, and they're proof that you can too. So whether you're scribbling business plans on napkins or stepping into the arena of innovation, remember, you're not alone. You're in good company. So let's explore these stories of transformation and take the first steps together on our path to purpose. Let's begin. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Strategic Veteran. I'm your host, Adam Peters, and today we have the honor of speaking with Tyler Schmoker, a retired Army Combat Arms senior non-commissioned officer whose career spans over 20 years of dedicated service in the active duty Army, the National Guard, and the Army Reserves. Tyler's journey is a testament to resilience, leadership, and strategic insight. Throughout his distinguished military career, Tyler was a career combat engineer, held senior staff roles in S2, which is Intel, and Operations, which is S3. His service includes pivotal moments such as the Hurricane Katrina QRF at the New Orleans Superdome, which provided him with profound insights into the fragility of our infrastructure and the resilience required to maintain a functional society. After his military service, Tyler transitioned to the roles as a private military contractor in Afghanistan and in the continental United States, eventually becoming a corporate security executive. Today, he's the solopreneur and the founder of Principal of Winsley, a boutique B2B management consulting firm specializing in corporate security, diverse startups, veteran-owned businesses, and more. Tyler's story is about his military and professional achievements and his commitment to readiness and capability encapsulated in his core value: stay capable. His leadership was demonstrated during his time as managing director of a private security operation in Minneapolis, where he successfully led an organizational transformation amidst civil unrest and the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. Join us as we delve into Tyler's extraordinary journey, exploring his military service, transition to civilian life, and ongoing mission to support and lead through strategic planning and facilitation. So let's dive in and warmly welcome Tyler Schmoker, a true embodiment of what it means to be a strategic veteran. Tyler, brother, thank you so much for being here to do this.
Yeah, brother,
today,
I'm happy to be here. I'm so excited to dig in. Can't wait.
Yeah, dude. So let's jump right in, man. Share a little bit about where you grew up, what early life was like for you, and what inspired you to join the Army.
Yeah, so I grew up in rural North Dakota, and pretty much all of North Dakota is rural, but I grew up in a rural part of North Dakota. And I think my graduating class, we were one of the bigger classes in the school, and I think we were 31 kids when we graduated, give or take a couple. But so I grew up in a farming community, a farming family, and so from an early age, I worked on the family farm around machinery, prioritizing project management before I knew what it really was. And just, I would say in some ways a really broadening childhood in terms of, growing up fast. And in other ways, I would say it was a little bit sheltered, right? You're in a small community, everyone that lives there, everyone knows everyone's business, those types of things. But certainly some benefits in terms of some practical skills that would lead me through my life. And also, just that strong Midwest work ethic. So that being said, there were essentially a couple paths, where we grew up. It's like you either worked in farming or very closely related to it, or you moved away and did something else. So when I was growing up, we didn't go without, but didn't necessarily have a lot. It got a little bit better as I got a little bit older, but pretty poor when I was young. And then, things gradually improved. But, I decided, I wanted to go out and see the world and see what was out there. And, my dad had served in the Army. He was a he was drafted during Vietnam, and I had a grandfather who'd served in Korea, and just other men in our family that had served. So I would say we weren't overly patriotic, but we were patriotic enough, and we valued our service. And if your ticket got punched, you were going to go and do your duty. And so I decided, well, I can't afford to go to college on my own, and how am I going to get out of here? And I got $800 to my name, so decided to sign up for the Army. And really, quite honestly, it was a matter of that was the only recruiting station that was within, I think, 100 miles of where I live. So the other branches were just out of the question because they didn't have a recruiter within what I considered proximity to where I could get. So ended up joining the Army, and then I think 5 days after high school I was in the Army. So I didn't have the summer off or anything like that. So it was really just kind of down and dirty, graduated, and I was in the Army, and the rest was history.
Dude, it's so funny because it's basically like you just told my story. I grew up in southern Indiana around the farms. Same situation, right? Like the army was just the way out because I knew there was more to the world. So it's you're the first person in like 40 of these that I've recorded that really has a similar story to like, it's really hard to understand. Like the Midwest, it's really farming or nothing, really. It's like what I mean, most of my friends from high school are either teachers or working on the farm or working for some kind of company that does something for the farm, and it just revolves around that. My town wasn't quite as small as yours, but I think I graduated with like almost twice what you did.
Yeah, big
But yeah,
city.
no, that's so when you obviously you said the other branches didn't stand a chance just because the army was the only one in close proximity to you. So why an engineer? Why did you decide to become a combat engineer?
So funny story. And just to clarify, so I hold a couple of different MOSs. So my original MOS going into the Army was heavy construction equipment operator. So when I went to talk to the recruiter, and I can say I had a pretty good recruiter. So a lot of people talk about my recruiter lied. I didn't have that problem. My recruiter was pretty upfront. I got the best college deal and all that other stuff that I could get. So they were pretty good in helping support me all the way through the MEPS process and those types of things. So shout out to my recruiter back from high school. But yeah, I was excited about being in the Army, and I joke a little bit that it was kind of a lack of other options. So it sort of was, but not really. I mean, if there would have been a Marine Corps recruiter, I would have probably talked to them too, and whoever came up with the best deal. But it's like, I was going to go do something as part of the ground forces because at the time that just appealed to me. I didn't really have any desire to go into the Navy or the Air Force. And so, but I was naive in that I really didn't know that there were jobs. I sort of knew that there were different jobs, and they're like, well, what do you want to do in the Army? I was, well, I want to be in the Army. Yeah, but what do you want to do? And the recruiter asked, well, what do you do now? I said, well, I work on the farm. He's like, well, what's that? Well, we fix fences, we drive trucks, tractors, we work all day. He's like, well, I've got the perfect job for you. And it's pretty true because engineering really is, it's like infantrymen with, farm equipment painted green and screaming across the battlefield. So, it kind of just lined up. So I ended up becoming a heavy equipment operator. And, so then I thought, well, maybe I'll get into a construction battalion and I'll be building roads and schools and all. That didn't happen. So I ended up going to my first duty station. I went to a sapper company. And so I was in the assault and obstacle platoon. So for anyone who's familiar with like infantry company type of structure, you have your line platoons that are riflemen essentially, and then you have like a special weapons platoon that's your crew serve, your machine guns, your grenade launchers, those types of things. So essentially within the engineering world and within a sapper company, it's very kind of a close counterpart to like an infantry company. And then you have the assault and obstacle platoon, which is bulldozers, and they had like these small trucks at the time, C trucks. It was like a bucket truck. But basically your mission in life was to advance with armor or advance with vehicles. You would be there to break through any breaches, whether it was like berm breaches, like, obstacles that have been in place. And really the primary mission was mobility, counter mobility, and survivability. So after you breach through obstacles and you're maneuvering with the combat force, then you're digging in assets. So whether you're digging in armor so that they can fight, or you're digging in infantrymen, and then you're just continually just leapfrogging with those folks and trying to keep up, dig them in, and then, they take off, you do the cleanup if there's time, or you just advance right along with them, and then you're digging them in at next positions.
Yeah, I think that's bullshit because I never had an engineer company dig me in ever. I was always digging in with my own fucking e tool.
Yeah, yeah.
No, and what year did you join?
So I technically I did delayed entry program in late 98. I was a senior in high school. And so I guess the only real benefit to that was, I think, for recruiters, they could get their number during those winter months before, the kids that weren't going to go to college and didn't have a job were like, oh shit, what am I going to do? Well, so the recruiters would use that to get their number, but it was a way to kind of lock in your MOS or something like that if there was availability that month. So that's what I ended up doing. And I think that because I did that, I got some rank when I got in. Like, I got E2 signing up, or I think I referred a buddy of mine in. So I got a little bit more money because I was an E2 instead of an E1. And then I'm just trying to think. So come to find out, when I retired, though, apparently you get a little bit of retirement points towards your calculation, like from a reserve retirement. So for those 3 or 4 months or whatever that I was in the delayed entry program, I guess it's called, you get some constructive credit for that goes onto the back end for your reserve retirement. So it's like, oh, well, that's nice.
That's kind of cool. So how long were you actually active duty?
I was active for the first 4 year enlistment. And so I got out in mid 2003 or early to mid 2003, with the intent to, well, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to use my GI Bill. And like a lot of people, well, maybe I'll get a degree in and go back in as an officer, right? Like, I think a lot of people kind of think along those same tracks. But, so fast forward to like 2003, you know, 9/11 had already happened, and I was stationed in Korea when the ground war started in Iraq. And so when I ETS'd off of act duty, I went into the National Guard. And so, I'm going to go to school, and then deployments start. And when you're in the National Guard, you get mobilized and stuff. So I always say that, really, for all intents and purposes, even after I got off of active duty after my first 4 year enlistment, really the first 9+ years of my career, between National Guard mobilizations, overseas deployment, and then also like PME and training and special schools and stuff like that, I made a living off of being in the Army for like the first 9 years of my career, on a pretty consistent basis.
Yeah, I was just trying to paint a picture of your engineer career because I know you were also S2 and then you ended up in a three shop, which is not unheard of once you hit E7, E8, right? But your primary mission for engineers and those listening that don't know basically became route clearance. It was drive a bulldozer down the road and get blown up. And I had those D8s are so cool, man. That was the coolest thing ever to be able to drive those and just riding down the road and boom. It's like, what was that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the the,
so
the, the armored D8. I've never operated an armored D8. I mean, I'm old enough that we had some armored D7s at the time, D7Fs. So even the old D7s, but yeah, those bulldozers, they're force multiplier on the battlefield, for a lot of reasons. And whenever you show up and you're able to help dig in assets, whether it's armor or whether you're there with the bucket truck and you can dig in some infantry grunts, everyone's always happy to see you.
absolutely 100% for sure. I yeah, I do. I remember cruising in that D8 to go do route clearance because you guys were just spread so thin, towards the later years of the war that like anybody who could help needed to help. And so so you do the 4 years active duty, you switch to the guard. When did the MOS change happen?
Oh, I I think I made it all the way to E6, but the caveat is I fast tracked a bit. Like, I think I made E6 in just a little over 6 years, like 6.5 years. And then I converted my primary MOS to 12 Bravo, just because at that point I was in pretty much combat engineering units the whole time anyway, but I was always like in the A&O specialty platoon. It's like from a career outlook perspective, it seemed like branch managers, this was the niche I was going to be in. So I might as well kind of position to improve promotion potential and those types of things. Because then again, within the A&O and the equipment operator side of the world, um, folks, it was tough to get E5. Like I didn't fast track to E5, but then I made E6 pretty fast. And then I also made E7 pretty fast as well. I think I was just a little over 9 years as an E7. And that would have never happened if I hadn't reclassified to 12 Bravo. And then eventually I picked up a 12 Charlie MOS as well.
Jesus, man, you just busy. What was it about Intel that kind of drew you in?
So on the Intel side, both the 2 shop and the 3 shop side, I basically got into a situation where, I promoted pretty quickly. And quite honestly, the first time I went to Iraq, I didn't go with a route clearance package, which is a little bit rare. So I'd been trying to get on to a deployment to Iraq or Afghanistan for a while, and for whatever reason, it just didn't quite work out. And then I got a call from a unit. I'd transitioned up to the North Dakota Guard. I'd gone back home or whatever, and I got a call, and they're like, "Hey, we're looking through your personnel records. You've got the MOSs and the time and grade and all this other stuff that aligns with this thing a mission we're going to go and do." Basically, a task force where they were pulling people of a certain rank and certain backgrounds and had certain experience into a task force unit. So all pretty much like individual augmentees. And it ended up being a very staff centric role. So it was embedded with the civilian element of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, but the Gulf Region Division in Iraq. So you had civilian engineers that were in Iraq within their compound, but then they still had military liaisons. So basically, I went into that as an E6. And at first, I'm like, well, I should have gone to like a Sec 4 mission or a route clearance package mission or whatever. But then it started to click early on. Like I started to use the computer more, pick up those administrative skills. Plus, I wasn't going out every day, but I was still going out a mission. I was still going out and doing engineering, reconnaissance, and surveillance missions, and moving around the country and doing those types of things. So I was kind of getting the best of both worlds, starting to figure out that strategic component of the military and how back office works and doing MDMP and all of that other stuff. So it was kind of like a quasi S3 role. And then after that, I was essentially in staff for the rest of my career between battalion, brigade, division level staffs and doing that. And I just found that I had a knack for it. And although it's one of those things where a lot of people are like, that's where PowerPoint Rangers and staff weenies hang out and stuff like that. It's like, being combat arms and being on the ground like that, it's a young man's game. And you start to see people get broke down. And I mean, even being fairly operational for 6, 7, 8, 9 years, like I was already starting to feel it in my knees and my back as well. It's like, well, if I'm going to stay in this game for 20, I need to figure out what I want to do. Plus, it's like I can exercise my brain and I can have strategic level impact, and I can be right seat to the seat of power on the combat field. So you're on the in the battlefield. So I kind of took it as, all right, Tyler, this is an opportunity to stop the trigger pulling, stop being a trigger puller, so to speak, although I was more on the equipment side. So I don't want to give any illusions that I was the biggest pipe hitter on the battlefield, because I certainly wasn't. But going from being a tactical trigger puller to being someone who's a button pusher. So that's how I started to think about it. And so I embraced that. So I eventually got into those S3 and S2 billets and staff and started really getting, smart on being a battle NCO, all the command staff stuff. And then, that served me well in my corporate career as well, where it was, so I had an easier transition into the private sector because I just didn't go from being a 12 Bravo platoon sergeant or first sergeant into, okay, well, now I have to change my whole world. Cause I'd already kind of been in there, and I'd been kind of, embedded with officers who kind of had a different way of thinking. Right.
Yeah, dude, I like to echo what you just said, because combat, it doesn't matter what you're doing, it does take its toll on your body. I found myself in a pretty similar position. After 3 to Iraq, my fourth one was to Afghanistan, and the only way they would take me, because I had been hurt, was is if I was going to be the top operations NCOIC, right? I learned so much in that role. Initially I had that same, oh, I'm going to be a staff weenie or, a fobbit or whatever it is, but it really ended up expanding my mind, and had my career not been cut short, it would have helped me immensely moving forward, because you're right. You get closer to the right seat of power, as you said, and you learn how to maneuver troops from a bigger picture standpoint, not just an on the ground standpoint. You're interacting with different, branches of the military, calling in air or whatever. And so it's just like the coordination and understanding how to actually really move troops and prevent them from ending up in situations, that they can't see, that you happen to be able to see. It was an awesome experience, and I'm so thankful for it.
Yeah, me too. Like you learn how to make staff estimates, and it really just widens your panoramic out and it rounds you out so much.
Yeah, and I think it even helps, to this day in building my own business. I'm sure, I mean, you touched on that a little bit, saying that it helped in your transition from, the military to the civilian world. So that's awesome. You mentioned Hurricane Katrina and the QRF that you were on for that as being a pivotal moment in your career. So can you talk about that for a few minutes?
Yeah, so for me, I've never been at the tip of the spear of anything, but I'll say on a few occasions I got lucky in my career to be part of something pretty significant, and that was one of them. So I was in a National Guard unit at this time, in an engineering company as part of an engineering group, and I think the way that it actually happened was, I was in Louisiana Guard at the time, and they had an infantry brigade that had deployed to Iraq. And I actually tried to get on that deployment and I didn't get onto it. So, I mean, I was desperately trying to get into the war and before the war was over. You remember back in those days before everyone knew it was going to be forever. So everyone was fighting for billets to get there. You didn't want to be the guy walking around without a combat patch and a slick right sleeve after it was all said and done. And so I had that same mindset as well. So I wanted to go over to Iraq or Afghanistan and do my part, and I didn't get on that. Well, what happened then was Louisiana had a quick reaction force, kind of, not exactly, but a little bit similar to the same type of concept as like the Ready Battalions and the Ranger Regiment, or the 82nd Airborne always has a battalion, or I think they even have a brigade that's always green, right? So it was the same type of thing within Louisiana Guard, where they had this QRF where you had these units that were always in a green status that could be rapid deployable. Like I think the concept was 3 hours anywhere in the state. And so that was a primary mission of the infantry brigade. I think it was the 256 Tiger Brigade that it went to, of Louisiana Guard, it went to Iraq. So then that billet got shifted over, and so, well, we're not doing it with the infantry guys, so we'll give it to the next best thing. We'll give it to the infantrymen with tractors. So they gave it to the engineers. So we got tasked with that, and I was one of two companies in the state that was considered like ready companies or QRFs for the state. And so to date myself a little bit, this was back in, I think we first got that mission in 2004. So I hadn't been long off active duty at the time. And we got these little pager beeper things. And so it was just where it would go off. And I don't even think this one had messaging on it. So this government issued pager beeper. And basically, if it beeps, you go to the unit, right? So you go to the armory, and we already had the A bag and B bag that were packed up and ready to go. So it's not like, oh, I got to find my shaving kit and all that. It's like, no, these are bags that stay sealed so that you can put them in your trucks. Vics are already organized and stuff. So you're just getting trucks online, stuff stays fueled. You get your A bag and B bag in there and you roll out for an in-depth period of time. So we actually had the beepers go off, and we got a mission the year prior during Hurricane Ivan, and it's in the public domain. A lot of people don't know about it, but basically it was a dry run for Katrina in a sense, because they thought that Ivan could make landfall in New Orleans and cause some of those problems that had happened. So we ended up deploying down to the Superdome for Ivan, and we ended up being there 2-3 days, something like that. And it was a non-event, packed up, went home. Well, fast forward the next year, the beeper goes off again, And so we ended up deploying out. But a funny story. So I always joked around that in Louisiana Guard, as soon as Jim Cantori from the Weather Channel was in Louisiana reporting, like we knew we were going to get mobilized, because basically if they had all their B-level reporters out there getting blown around by the wind and stuff, it's probably still okay. But once they brought in the big show, Jim Cantori, it's like, well, we're going to get mobilized. So I'm going to figure out if I can, put
Let me
off
just
my,
head to the company real quick.
yeah, put off my
Yeah.
semester or whatever else, or it's going to wreck my semester, which is a normal circumstance as well. But so Cantori's there. It's like, oh, this is going to happen. This is going to be the big one. Beeper goes off, and I was at the armory by 3 a.m. in the morning or something like that. And that day we were rolling down to New Orleans, so we were there the day before landfall of Hurricane Katrina. I remember as we were convoying and rolling into the city, you could literally see Katrina out in the Gulf, just this big ominous turn. I mean, and it's just otherworldly. And so we go to the Superdome, we get set up. It's basically like a refugee operation at that point, where it's the quote unquote shelter of last resort. You had folks that were coming in. So, of course, you can't bring in the blades that are over this or bigger than a fingernail clipper. If people have weapons, booze, all this other types of stuff. So, in order to come in, you have to give up these things. So, those types of operations, then just patrol, and then also doing some medical help with people and trying to keep people calm. So, I weathered the storm at the Superdome, and then obviously the levees broke and all that stuff. So from the start of Hurricane Katrina until we evacuated the last of the refugees out of the Superdome, I think it was 10 days. And then we pulled up out of there, and then we ended up being in the city pretty much through the end of the summer. So like 4 or 5 months, something like that. And so there was the main QRF mission to the Superdome, the evacuation of that, and then just various mobility. We cleared roads with our equipment. Then we got into more of like security operations posture and doing S2 and all this other stuff for like the next several months. But again, just bear in mind that, it was basically no notice, and it was like a 4 or 5 month deployment. And although I was in Louisiana at the time, it's like you might as well have been on the other side of the planet.
Yeah, I don't remember Katrina that well, mainly because I was in Iraq when Katrina actually happened. So, all I would get about Katrina is whatever we saw at the main fob when we would get the chance to go to the chow hall or whatever, when they had TVs in there on AFN or whatever. So it's really cool to hear your experience of that. And in that, whatever that mission you were on as a guard unit, that ended up becoming an active duty mission. It was called Sea Smurf in 2009. After I did my second deployment, I had the pleasure of being on that for a fucking year, and it was miserable. It was miserable because we're red cycle all the time. So that means within 1 hour, if you get a phone call, your same situation, vehicle staged, bags packed, you have to be at the company and you're going somewhere. And of course, in the Army and all its infinite wisdom, you do drills, I don't know, 100 times a month, it seems like. So you just never had any free time. And then turn around and fast forward after my Afghanistan deployment, when I PCSed up to Fort Lewis, Washington, I was on it again. They had just renamed it, called it GRF. So I got to spend 2 years on that mission, living with an A and B bag completely packed. The Army, and again, their infinite wisdom, wanting you to go out and do training, but all your gear is packed in your bag. So it's like, what do you want from us here? Like, so no, that's awesome, man. So you mentioned earlier, and this is a part of the show where we talk about your transition, because my whole mission is to really be the guy I didn't have when I transitioned. When you go through that loss of identity and that loss of purpose and all of that. So you said your transition wasn't that bad because of your experiences in the S shops and learning all of that, but I have to believe there was some challenges that you faced during your transition. So can you talk about your transition and what that was like for you?
Well, yeah, like anyone, there were things that I had challenges with identity and stuff. But again, I've said this on other shows as well. I feel like I got off a little bit easy because, one, I did have that battalion, brigade, division level staff experience to where I was getting exposed to officers who kind of approached it more as a corporation or a business. So, I got that benefit. But then also, because I ended up still being in the National Guard, but eventually going overseas and going on a FID mission as a private contractor in Afghanistan. So I had that element as well, to where I was basically operating on all these different statuses over the course of my career. So when I went and was like a paramilitary, FID advisor in Afghanistan, I started to get a sense for like the business of operations, the business of war, the business of security. And then eventually I even got into the corporate security sector. Well, I was still in the National Guard and eventually I think transitioned into the reserve. So, but I would say for me, the bigger challenge I had with transition and identity, because again, I was able to overlap a lot of things. And because even the line of work I work in is still kind of one toe into that community. So it's a little bit different than, if I did a full 20 years active duty as a combat engineer, and then boom, all of a sudden I'm trying to go through, what's the Army program now to where they do like the
I
mentorship?
think it's called SFL TAP now, or
TAPS.
whatever. Or,
Yeah,
yeah,
TAPS.
TAP. Yeah,
So
it's still garbage.
yeah, okay. Well, I can tell you when I got off active duty, ACAP wasn't very good either. But
No, that's
so
what I went through was ACAP. It was trash. It was
yeah,
awful.
yeah.
Write a resume, use your GI Bill. Good luck getting a corporate job. See ya.
Or NYPD and LAPD want you, but other than that, nobody wants you. Basically, it's like, well,
There you
I don't
go.
want to
Right.
do that. So, but so where I had a challenge though was I had by this point I'd come off of a tour on the Korean border and then ETS'd. I ended up going on to a surprise, really intense mission into New Orleans during Katrina as a National Guardsman, kind of the closest I've ever gotten to tip of spear in anything in my life. And then eventually got onto an Iraq deployment that I volunteered for. And then after that, kind of saw how the private war machine worked. And it's like, well, I could do that. And then I eventually did some contracting overseas as, military contractor in Afghanistan. But then when I gotten back from that, I finally was finishing up my bachelor's degree, which took way too long. And I started working on a master's degree. And so now this is like the 2008, 2009 timeframe. So that's after the housing bubble had collapsed and the economy was totally garbage. And, I'm a guy that, although I was fortunate in the military and paramilitary experience that I had, it's not like I was going to go work at a Fortune 500 as a sales rep when they're laying people off and the economy is garbage. So that's the period where I really struggled the most and had a lot of self doubt because, like a lot of people, it's like, well, I'm an E7 and I fast tracked and I've done all these hardcore things and these people don't even know what I've gone through and all this other stuff. I've got a degree and I've got a master's degree. And I eventually got to a point where, my wife's like, it's, you're making good money or whatever. And I'm glad you're over, doing some stuff, helping a foreign army and lifting weights with your buddies in the evening, but it's time to come home now. Right. So it's like, okay, fair enough. You've been a good sport about this. So come back home and, applying for jobs and trying to translate my resume down from 17 pages of acronyms into 3 pages, and it was still a garbage resume, but I was getting a little bit closer to what it was, but I still didn't know what right really looked like. But so I did that, and just no one's interviewing a guy like me, not for any jobs that I wanted. And I eventually just kind of hit that realization point, and I ended up going out to a job fair, and it was for a nuclear plant that was, an hour outside of the city here in Minneapolis. And I went to this job fair and I have my resume polished up and I'm high speed and whatever. And there were like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people at this job fair for all sorts of different jobs, including like the security guard positions that were out there. And, it was a long time ago. I can't remember for sure, but I want to say, if memory serves, I'd heard somewhere that there were between 600 and 700 applicants for those security officer positions. And so it was a little bit higher end security than standing at a bank branch or something like that. And there was a longer training pipeline, and it ended up actually being very good training. But I was one of like only 20 or 30 people that got hired. And of those, I think most of them were like temp positions. So it was like less than 10 that were going to be permanent positions. And I got one, which, I had a resume to support it or whatever, and it was $13.50 an hour starting out. And that just kind of goes to show you the competitive nature of it. I was a senior NCO. I'd been there. I'd done that. I could sit down. I was pretty articulate in an interview and those types of things, but it was just really tough. And then even after them, was I happy that I made the cut? And I got to go through like 8 or 10 weeks of training, and some of the best firearms training that I ever got in my entire life, and started to learn a lot about like physical security, like not just veteran. I say I understand physical security, but like actually learning how physical security really works. So there were a lot of good things, but at the same time, you're still like, I should be doing so much more about than this. I should be making this amount of money and stuff. But I struggled a long time chasing jobs that I was never going to get before I finally bit the bullet and said, well, I'm going to do this thing. And come to find out, after I took that $13.50 job, I eventually ended up getting recruited into a different division within that company. And then I started going into management positions and started building out a career. So I just kind of had to die that ego death and say, well, this is your lot, Tyler. You can either sit around and complain about or say what you're too good for or whatever. You can just start living. And so I did that. And then, basically started over building my career. But as with anyone, whether you're getting out as a senior NCO or an officer or whatever, and now, you're looking and you're making 20 or 30 grand a year again, saying, well, I'm the shit, but well, now I don't feel like it because no one else clearly sees my awesomeness. You really have to reflect. But so I would say those were my biggest struggles.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man, because I hear that a lot. Like a lot of guys will think they're entitled to a position that they're really just not qualified for. And like you said, chasing things that aren't a good fit. So in that, like, were you always interested in the security aspect of it with the intel background, working in the three shops, even having an engineering background? There's still security involved in that. And and was it like mainly, I'm sure a big part of it was the pay, because that's shit pay. Like it really just is shit pay to be a guard, dude. So was that like kind of were you interested in security? Is that why you just let yourself, die that ego death or whatever, like you said, and then, kind of see what happens with this job?
Yeah. So, when I was a little kid, I decided I was going to be a soldier. I was going to be in the army. Right. So I achieved that dream. And then after that, it's like, well, I'm going to get out and I'm going to be in corporate security. I didn't really know what that was yet. But so I went through the steps to get to that point. And really, even between there, when I got over to like Iraq, and I even saw it a bit during Katrina as well. It's like, yeah, the ex tier one guys that are now running around in their 511s and M4s and stuff like that. And they're, contractors back when it was cool to be Blackwater, right? So it's like, well, I want to do that. So I went and did it. Even while in the National Guard, I figured out a way to organize it and get it all approved. And I was a contractor. And then I got into corporate security. So I guess that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I've always considered myself kind of a professional soldier, but just didn't want to do it one way. So I would say that everything that I've done up until this point, the different ways that I've done it, is not entirely to plan, but completely what I wanted it to be.
That's awesome, man. That's really freaking cool, actually, I think. How do your military skills adapt to your role as a PMC and in corporate executive security as well? I mean, obviously, I think that's a blatantly obvious answer,
Well,
but
the
it's
PMC is one for one. I mean, basically, you're getting a check and you get to wear clothes that you want to wear instead of a
yeah, right.
uniform.
But I,
But
th- I
it's
think there is a big difference, because you alluded to it, right? That 10 weeks of training for becoming a security guard at the nuclear facility. You said you had the best firearms instruction that you'd ever received. And I think there is this common misconception, because we do have a lot of civilian listeners here who don't know what the military is like. And unless you're an infantry guy, particularly unless you're special operations forces, you're not getting really cool training. You're just not. It's just very basic firearms training. So did you translate any of your skills over, or did you learn more of it kind of going through, those different steps as you would, become a PMC and then become a security guard at the nuclear force and start building your career?
I would say that more on the staff side in the military directly supported stuff I would do later in the corporate security side, because one, it forced you to touch computers and learn PowerPoint and learn Excel and all these other things. So by the time I was within the commercial security industry, I wasn't lost in the sauce, because now you got to figure that you came up at the same time as I did. You didn't have to be computer savvy in the late 90s. You didn't, right? And so then you had a lot of guys who go under their combat arms rock for the next 20 years. Now it's 2020, and they're kind of screwed in a lot of ways because they haven't touched it at all, right? Or very little. And I even saw where, I would have E7s, E8s, so people kind of at my level that were, rotating out of like line unit positions. Maybe they were a platoon daddy or they were a first sergeant, and then they were going up to battalion or brigade or division or whatever to do their staff time because they had to, when I'd already been there for a while. And you see a lot of these dudes come in, they didn't have basic PC skills much. They weren't going to be doing anything with like CPOF or MCS or any of these, other integrated systems. And a lot of them really didn't understand MDMPT and how to put together, bottoms up briefs or commander's update brief for all these other things. So a lot of those were things, particularly like around presentations and military decision making process and facilitation of like strategy and strategy development. That's stuff that really served me well. I would say, kind of on the flip side of that, going into the like doing that commercial training, like as a nuclear security guard, and like 10 weeks of training, and then eventually as a PMC, I went through a State Department diplomatic security contractor program. So I went through all that with where you're doing ramming techniques with cars and pit maneuvers and high performance off-road driving and CQB and all of this other stuff. So in a way, I would say some of the better tactical training I ever got was after after I was kind of done being, you know, conventional combat arms in the Army, and it's when I started doing corporate security or physical security and PMC stuff, and it rounded me out. So it's kind of like it was a flip flopping of expertise, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. That State Department course where you go drive the cars, that's fun, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's a
the,
lot of
the the
fun.
whips three,
Yeah.
between that course and again that NRC, you know armed nuclear responder course I went through. I mean, that's basically what, probably about 20 weeks of pipeline right there. And most of my classmates, in particularly the State Department courses, a lot of Rangers, a lot of SF, you had SEALs, you had Force Recon guys, you had MARSOC guys, and guys that I'm friends with to this day. And then you had some even high-end infantrymen who were maybe they were in 82nd Airborne or they were part of LURS or something like that. So just some real meat-eating dudes that, I wasn't at their level in a lot of cases. I mean, at least as far as my background was concerned. But you get into the training evolutions, you're just people, you're doing all the same stuff. And I was physically strong and I was smart. So I feel like I got really fortunate to where, I didn't get to that elite level in the military ever, but I got a lot of that rub and I'm really thankful for it.
Yeah, man, that's awesome, dude. So going through all of that and really building a career at that nuclear facility with that company or whatever, when did you discover kind of the entrepreneurial bug and have the idea to start Winsley and your own company doing private security?
Well, so I don't, and in case any licensing boards are listening, I don't provide private security. I do consulting
That's on
only.
me. That's on me. That's on me.
I
When
do
did you
not.
decide to start consulting as a business? How about
Thank
that?
you, thank you. Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
I do not provide direct security services for anyone that's listening, but that's actually true. I joke, I don't, but I do consulting. So the entrepreneurial bug was really by accident for me, quite honestly. So I had been with a large global security firm. I had two separate pumps with them. I was with them for a period of time. And then I ended up getting another gig. So I was a Pinkerton, the world famous Pinkerton. So I was a Pinkerton in project management for about a year and a half, and it was a good assignment, but I kind of outgrown the role, and I ended up pivoting back into this large firm where I'd been at, and you know, same thing in the military. I found opportunities through these different progressive roles. And I went from being like an account manager to a national account manager to a portfolio manager. Then I set up a global PMO, and I was eventually a managing director. So there was good career progression wherein this organization was doing the kind of stuff that I liked doing, both on the corporate business admin side as well as the operational side, providing commercial security services for Fortune 500s, right? So I was getting a lot of satisfaction in the diversity of work, and I would have probably stayed there forever. Like but eventually the company ended up getting acquired by a competitor, and I was offered a position to stay there, just kind of got a sense for the atmospherics and just decided I didn't want to stay. So I ended up bowing out. So I ended up going to a smaller, not a global security firm, but a national security firm for a couple of years. And I ended up doing like leading a team of like DevOps. So I had like software engineers, and we were developing technology and tier one integrations. So continuing to learn more on like the technology side of the security industry, and then also even just agnostic tech around like tier one integrations and software sourcing and configuration and data and analytics, a whole lot of other stuff. But I ended up exiting there. It just wasn't a good fit for me. Good company, just wasn't a good fit for me. So 2 years was enough. And I decided, paid off the house, and we're in a good position. We sat down, figured out the budget. And I kind of talked about, well, I could do this or I could do that. And my wife's like, why don't you just try it? She's like, now is the time, and if you've paid off the house, you've taken care of me, I'm working, we're in good shape. Now's the time to give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, what's the worst that happens? Now you have a really good resume and you can go get another job. So that's where we're at, man. So if the company, that long-term employer that I had been with and was very happy there and had a lot of career progression, and I was being well compensated and all of that, if that hadn't gotten acquired, I'd still be there to this day.
That's cool, man. That's a really cool story, dude. You talked about earlier when we first started and you were growing up, you were kind of doing project management before you knew what it was. And I'm not sure anybody really knows what project management is. I've been super excited to talk to you because all of your stuff since the day I started my journey on LinkedIn, you were one of the first people that I found to really like pay attention to content and learn how to build something. So you've always talked about project management in the sense of, the personal security or executive security or just the security world. So what actually is project management? Is it really just as simple as what it sounds like, or is it a lot more convoluted like I think it probably is?
So project management is really about specifically defined methodologies to conceptualize and execute or implement and execute projects. So for anyone who's listening, if you're looking to start getting smart on what project management actually is, I would say definitely take a look at PMI, Project Management Institute, right? There's some good content out there. And then also before you think that you have to get out of the army and automatically go in and get your PMP certification or whatever, there's a lot of free courses out there too, whether it's through Coursera. And I think that there's some introductory like project management specialist courses that PMI offers for free. So I would encourage people to take a look at some of that free courseware that's out there, again, through PMI or Coursera. And I'm sure that there are some other places you can get it, but it'll start to give you the project or the fundamentals of really the two main methodologies is waterfall, which is, it's predictive projects. And then you have agile, which is iterative projects, which is a little bit closer to operations in a sense, but it's a little bit more deliberate than just conventional operations. But, I was fortunate that because I came up and spent the entirety of my military career in the engineering regiments, and then also had that billet with the Corps of Engineers. So it's me as the military guy helping facilitate the military stuff for true engineers and licensed PEs or professional engineers to not get killed in Iraq and do their job. And then I would help with the local sourcing and all this other in between stuff. I got a lot of exposure to what like proper project management looks like. Because I will say this, a lot of veterans are big offenders of claiming project management experience because they were an NCO, and it is not the same thing. But there is, if you actually dive into the methodology and figure out, what are the phases of a project from, you're going into requirements gathering, you're doing pre-scoping, you're doing kickoff, you're doing, execution, you're doing 90-day control plans, all of these other things. If you actually dive into the methodology and start getting smart on how it actually works, no different than following like troop leading procedures or MDMP, project management is the same type of thing, but it's not a by feel thing. There are actually steps that you take and activities that you do at the different phase lines or the different milestones of the methodology. So for folks who are coming out of operations in the military and you're truly looking at getting smarter, start to take a look at some of those courses and the light bulbs are going to go off for you. And then when you're ready to go into like the private sector, start looking for your first project management job, you're not the person that has project management at the top of your resume and you get into an interview, if you even get to the point of interview, and you can't even tell the difference between waterfall and agile, because that's the stuff that really happens. And I only say that because I have screened literally thousands of resumes from applications for project manager positions, and I have interviewed hundreds of people, and it never ceases to amaze me how many folks say, "Oh, I was a project manager because I was a platoon sergeant." It's like, well, being a platoon sergeant is dang hard and it's very complex and there's a lot to do, but it's different than being a construction project manager or being a sales project manager or whatever your project management is. So draw that distinction, right?
Yeah, that's an awesome explanation. And I think really where the disconnect is I feel like TAPS or whatever it's called now, ACAP, Skill Bridge, they push project management on veterans just because I feel like it's almost like an easy way out, right? Like, oh, this is something you guys can do. Cause it sounds like to me there is a lot of overlap, but it is a little bit more convoluted than just being a platoon sergeant. And you're right, being a platoon sergeant's hard. It's not easy, but also properly managing a multi-million-dollar project is fucking hard, right?
Well, and
Like
understanding budgets and Gantt charts and those types of things, because if you go in with just a whiteboard or your leader's green book, it's like some of these organizations, if you manage to luck your way into that position, you're going to get exposed pretty quickly, because the same way that the military has, even across MOSs or units, there's that common operating language that's going to be wherever you're at. You go into a new infantry company, new engineer company, everyone knows what troop leading procedures are. Everyone knows what an MDMP is. Everybody knows what running estimates are in some of these things. Project management in different corporations is the same way. So you have to be able to speak that language and at least have an idea of what that is. So, and then decide if that's something you really want to do. Because I think in reality, a lot of people come out of the military, they're pretty good operations manager, but then they're applying for project management positions. Whereas in my view, it's probably a little bit easier to get into a general operations role than it is a project management role, because there's a bit more administrative rigor that comes along with being a project manager. And I think that probably keeps people from even getting interviewed then, because their resume outside of on their top headline of their resume says project manager. Yeah, but the rest of your resume doesn't say anything that's even common language. So I know that you're just saying I'm a project manager because, yeah, maybe you had a project manager or a project that you managed in the Army, but you didn't manage it like a project manager.
yeah, and it almost sounds like operations manager is actually a better fit coming right out. I know I was pushed when I finished flight school. I still had GI Bill left, all that good stuff. Might as well just get the bachelor's degree since we're in school mode. And I was at the technical college still. They had just launched their operations management bachelor's degree. I took one class and I was like, I'm done. This is boring to me. This is not for me. I hate this. So I just completely transferred out and went and did something else. But I could see how just with the little exposure I had to the operations management degree, that's a way better fit for us coming out.
Yeah. Well, and now even if you look at the forecast for jobs and what's happening with the economy and stuff, like you and I are about the same age. We came from the generation where get the bachelor's degree, right? Or maybe, and if you still don't have a job, we'll get the master's degree. And I have friends that I know that are even now, they don't like their job, so they're getting a PhD. And it's like, well, I think I'm just going to start a business instead and try that instead of paying more money to try and get another job and, whatever MBA they're trying to spam me with in my DM, right? So I think that there's that. But,
Yes.
when I talk to people, I'm not in this space, but if you think about kind of the change in globalization and how the US is looking to reindustrialize and make microchips here, and maybe we partner with Mexico more on manufacturing with the oversight from the US as opposed to doing it offshore in China or wherever else. It's like if I was a young cat coming out of the army now, and I wasn't dead set on being a career soldier that I ended up inadvertently being through different flavors and channels, it's like I would say I would look at manufacturing, to be quite honest with you. And maybe it's like getting a lean six, or maybe it's doing some sort of a technical certification or something like that. And the trades for a lot of years didn't get the credit that they deserved, but some of that is starting to come back. And the reality is you got folks who can make a pretty good living, have a couple nice cars, and can have a boat on the lake, and they work an honest job in the trades.
Yeah, and it's like you said with what you were exposed to in New Orleans, you saw how fragile our infrastructure is and the need to revamp all of this. And I think no matter what's going on in the political sphere right now, I think that's very much at the top of, or it should be at the top of, the federal government's list of things that needs to be improved. So I kind of see it the way you do. Like that's probably a really good route to go.
Yeah, if you're doing something with like electric grid work or even alignment or something like that, it's like you're never going to have to convince an organization to hire you as a lineman the same way that I did with a psychology degree and a military background, right?
Right, right, yeah. So you paid the house off. You got your wife's blessing, which was I think is amazing, right? To have the woman stand behind you that you've chosen to spend your life with, and really push you into forming your own company. So talk about that. What was that like? Did you face all the common imposter syndrome battles that we all do? Did you sit around and analyze and overanalyze, or did you just jump in with both feet and just get after it?
Yes and yes. I'm still doing both right now.
Right, yeah.
you know,
It's never ending.
Yeah, when my computer messes up now, or my Zoom calendar's not synced with my email anymore, so someone's scheduling an appointment, it doesn't go to my calendar, and I like that's on me. I have no IT department, or I have I use the term, you're time rich and cash poor, and you kind of always flip between the two. And I won't say I couldn't not afford to have someone develop a website for me, but it's like, well, I got clients, but I'm not 60 hours a week busy. And it's like, but I do have some time in my day, and I also need a website. So looks like Tyler's got to get the no code website and figure out how to muck my way through it. So there's all those, you're still getting all those new experiences where you're learning how to use new software, or if you have an IT issue, or you're figuring out how to register an LLC, or you're figuring out how to forecast how much taxes do I pay to the state and federal for this quarter based off my income, and is it not enough? Am I going to get into trouble? So then you're looking at tax code and all of this other stuff. So there's literally like a new adventure every day. And of course, along with that comes, it's like, well, why would anyone hire me when they can just go to McKinsey, right? It's like, what's the difference between me? So you're always out there pounding the pavement. And the thing that solo, or want, or hopeful solopreneurs and entrepreneurs need to understand is that you're going to sell more than you ever thought in your entire life. You're going to spend 90% of your time doing business development, right? So anyone out there who, and I'll say business owners that listen to this, and do you ever hire a consultant and wonder why they're billing you $200-300 an hour? It's because they're spending 90% of their time just getting the opportunities. And that's how consulting has to work in order to do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and you're absolutely right. Like I do 90% of everything by myself. I have two people behind me that help me with some other stuff, unpaid right now. That'll be made right eventually, whatever. But I'm like you, man. I spend my time and not my money. Like that's what it takes. And it's constantly, like you said, like I had that issue this morning with a really big opportunity that I can't yet talk about because it hasn't been announced publicly. But, I was supposed to be in this meeting. It didn't link to my calendar. I was 15 minutes late for this meeting. I knew it was a huge opportunity that I really wanted. And now I made myself look like a fool because my IT department, me, didn't have everything right. And that's just part of it, right? That's part of building anything. And you know we talk about it on here so much, but I can't reiterate enough, like when you decide to become an entrepreneur and build your own thing, you're always going to not know what you're doing. You're always going to not know what you're doing. You're going to have a general idea of what you're doing, but are you going to feel like you don't know what you're doing 99.9% of the time? Yes.
Yeah, and there's always uncertainty too. Everyone thinks, oh, you become your own boss and you're free and you leave the 9 to 5. It's like, yeah, but it's a different type of stress. You do have the freedom, you have creative control, but the highs are a lot higher and the lows get a lot lower.
Yeah, they sure do, don't they? I'm traveling most of July, and so I'm really nervous because this will be like a really big test for like how does my business run? And it's business related while I'm traveling, but it's also like I'm not going to have all of the things that I normally operate with on a normal basis, right? Like I'm condensing everything down to a laptop and a mouse. And so I'm like, and then with the time obligations while traveling and all that, it's like, oh, like this is going to be really interesting to see how the business works. When I'm spending time doing other things. So your core value is stay capable, and I love this because your posts on LinkedIn are very much about being capable. I remember in the wintertime seeing you chopping wood, snowshoeing, uh, extreme athletic stuff. So talk about where does that come from? How did you develop that philosophy, and how does it guide you in your personal and professional life?
So I came up with stay capable. Basically, it falls back to like military readiness and preparedness. Obviously stay capable, but I have seen so many people at different points have opportunities presented for them and they weren't ready to jump because, oh, I'm not in shape enough, or I'm just not quite ready, and the circumstances didn't really line up quite right. And you're never going to be able to plan for every contingency or every eventuality or unknown perfectly because there's just so many things you can't plan for. And so you have to improvise. But there are kind of those core competencies with whatever you're doing. So, if you're working like video and media production, or if you're working in project management, or if you're working in management consulting or whatever, it's like I know that there are certain things that I can do that are going to kind of cover the baseline of eventualities that might happen. And then I can improvise through the other part of that so that when those opportunities do come up and they say, hey, we want to pay you hundreds of dollars an hour and we want you to work for us for 5 months. Yep, let's go. It's not even I don't have to check with my wife. I'm a grown man because we're already aligned on what's within the left and right limits, what's a no-fly zone, right? Like we've had those communications beforehand.
You
I know
got your
what that is.
interlocking sectors of fire. You're
Yeah,
ready to go.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So when it's time to rock and roll, you're ready to rock and roll. So I actually kind of have a story about this, and it kind of relates back to what we were talking about with Hurricane Katrina. So I had gotten off of active duty from the Army, and I was in the National Guard. And I get there, and it's kind of the still early GWAT. So the National Guard got a lot better over time, and I've spent most of my career in the Guard and Reserve as well. And you get units of mob. You got some real meat eaters in the National Guard and Reserve too. Not everyone, but just like active duty, you had some turds and you had some rock stars there as well. I think that's pretty consistent across the force. But so I'd gone into the National Guard. I was in an MOS that doesn't really promote very fast, even though I was pretty high speed and stuff. I was still wired a little bit of tight off of active duty, and I'd been right on the Korean border and pretty, so really forward deployed. But so I was going to school and I was still PTing every day. I was going out and doing the runs in the morning. I was still doing push-ups, sit-ups. I could max the PT test, all that other stuff. And we were at a drill weekend, and it was like a drill weekend. And then like the next week we were supposed to go to annual training for like a 2 or 3 week annual training. And one of my buddies he was a career National Guard guy. We were both E4s or whatever. So we were early in our careers, but he hadn't been on active duty. And he got offered a slot to go to a primary leadership development course at the time. So the E5 school. And yeah, and it was hard to get slots because, GWAT had already started up, and I can't remember. I don't know if they were doing conditional promotions yet or not for that. Maybe not. But I think at the time it was still, if you didn't have the school, you weren't going to get promoted or whatever. And he got offered this slot, and he's like, well, no, I'm not quite in shape yet for it. Cause basically the school was starting in 2 weeks and someone had dropped out. So it was like someone had dropped off. And so it was going to be a confirmed slot or whatever. And so they went down the list. And I think maybe a couple other people said no, but this one guy that I was friends with and knew said no. And they came to me and they said, you're going to go? It's like, yeah, good to go. Let's go. And so I went to the course instead of going to the annual training that had already scheduled for and whatever is going to leave in a week for that. So instead I was off that annual training. So instead of the 2 weeks, it was pushed to the right, an additional 2 weeks, pretty demanding school, the dead of July in Louisiana. So like total Tigerland. Yeah. Total Tigerland jungle misery. Right. So yeah. And so nobody wants to go to PLDC in Louisiana swamps, or yeah, in July, right? So, but I say, yeah, I'll go because I was fit. I still skill level 1, still skill level 2. I was still pretty dialed in on that. So ended up, I didn't even hesitate. Yeah, I'll go because I knew that I was going to get promoted if I did that, right? So went to PLDC, ended up being the distinguished honor graduate of the class, and that's with active duty folks there as well. And so I went there, was distinguished honor graduate within like 6 months or after that, I promoted to E5. Not long after that, like minimum time I was in E6. And it's like, I knew it's like, as long as I can say yes a lot, I'm going to go far with my career. So that's why I was boom, boom, boom. I was going into multiple MOSs. Deployments were coming up. I got a call. So I got a call from the National Guard, and they're like, hey, do you want to go? Would you consider, the wording was, would you consider going on this deployment to Iraq? And this was for like this task force that I was telling you about. And I said, yeah, I'll go. And he's like, so you'll consider going? I said, no, I'll go. When we leaving? And it's like the guy was shocked, and it wasn't like a voluntold situation. And so I ended up doing that, pick up E7, and I ended up picking up E8 before I retired as well. And so I took that same kind of methodology then into my civilian career. It's like when things came up and hard stuff came up or the stuff no one else wanted to do, yep, good to go, I'll go. And so I started passing people, and that even held true in the corporate sector then, to where I was on a strategic accounts division or whatever, and like management consulting in the security industry. And I was a manager, and you had these directors and vice presidents who, they were the legends or whatever, that would talk down to you, and pretty soon I'm passing them all by because I'm taking and then it's like, well, how'd this kid get this? It's like, I do all the stuff you guys wouldn't do. So now I'm here, and you're the guy that's in the same role for 10 years when I'm rocking and rolling and moving 6, 7 positions in that same time.
Dude, and I'm glad you shared that story, because the more I do this, the more I get in touch with, the audience and transitioning or transition veterans, the more I realize like being an entrepreneur is not for everybody. It's definitely not for everybody. I do think veterans have an advantage because of the high leverage skills that we develop while we're in. But this is a testament to what it takes to actually be an intrapreneur and climb that ladder as fast and as high as you possibly can. And I think your value of staying capable really kind of proves that, because you did it in the Army and then you do it in the corporation, because there's always going to be those shit details or those shit assignments within the corporation that nobody else wants to do. And if you're just the guy who's going to eat the shit sandwich and do them, it'll take you really far.
Well, and the thing too is that if you're able to say good to go a lot and you do that for them, one, they not only recognize you for that, but then instead of seizing opportunities that come to you, by happenstance, it turns into the opportunities just get funneled to you. So why does he get to do that? Because he's the guy who always says yes.
Right. Right. So what do you do now to stay prepared and capable and adaptable in the face of new challenges? I alluded to a little bit of the hard training I saw just through what you post on LinkedIn, but I'm sure it goes beyond that.
Well, there's definitely the physical component to it. I mean, I'm 44 years old now, but I can give most 30-year-olds or 25-year-olds a run for their money because, I stay physically fit. I still work on recovery or whatever, but I stay physically fit because you know what? Like I'm interested in doing like outdoor things and like why are you training so hard? It's like, well, you see someone going and climbing mountains on Instagram. It's like I've seen a lot of people out in the mountains who didn't prepare for it and their trips aren't fun. Whereas I've got the gas tank for it. When I go out and do these things that are adventurous and it's like the Instagrammable type of highlight reels, it's like I'm actually enjoying doing it because I'm not sucking wind, right? So I think about it that way. And then it applies to your professional life as well. You're kind of looking at the forecast ahead of like what are the operational requirements going to be? So whether it's certifications or whether it's positioning your business or whether it's positioning yourself, physically. And then also I just like on a personal level, I like to hobby and do hobbies I think that are somewhat professionally conducive to the business as well. So obviously being in shape is not going to hurt you professionally, right? Or I like to garden. I'm just interested in it, but I've got canned food. I'm shortening my supply chain and, I'm cooking at home and we're doing all these types of things. And the other stuff too is, oh, PS, by the way, in the age of social media now, if I'm a corporate security consultant, it doesn't hurt that I have social media content about canning food and gardening and collecting water. Like, so that just makes the ecosystem a little bit better, but it's not like I'm out there busting my butt in a garden so that I can have Instagram content because I'm some sort of a preparedness guru. I just happen to like doing these things and it's all part of my ecosystem. So find those things that are a part of your ecosystem that are conducive to your life, whether it's personally, professionally, practically, spiritually, whatever, and start to bring those things together within your sphere of influence. And you'll see how you start to have compounding network interests, so to speak, and it serves all of it.
Yeah, oh, that's such a good answer, man. And I think you're familiar with Matthew Banco, right? Have you done his podcast? So I don't know what episode it was, but he talks about there's a MEPS to get in the army and there should be a MEPS to get out. And he talks about the 5 areas: mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, and social, right? And what you were alluding to when you were talking about, you're outdoorsy, you live in a place where there's plenty of mountains to go climb, or some stuff to go climb, whatever. But people often aren't present enough with themselves and their physical body, with their fitness, they just see that stuff and they want to go do it. And it's like, man, if you actually like take care of yourself, and I'm speaking from experience because I just lost 100 pounds over the last year. You know what I mean? Like I let myself go. I fell into that transition whole hard. I had my demons I had to deal with, then met ayahuasca, the cheat code. And I say it's a cheat code. It's not really, because you still have to do the work. It just shows you what you're capable of. And in that I learned how to be present. And really to me, being present involves all five of those things. They all have to be right, right? Like I start every morning with a 4 mile walk. As soon as I get out of bed, that's what I do. You know what I mean? And then, there's obviously other physical exercises. I make it a point to talk to people in my life every single day who matter to me, who can help move the needle forward for me. And, I have a sense of spirituality, but it was before I was super agnostic based on, years of combat time and wrestling with those things. So, what a beautiful answer. I know I've had this conversation with you in your comments about gardening. Like that's an actual workout. Go turn over your fucking mulch beds in your landscaping. Like I promise you, by the end of the day, here at least here in Florida, you're gonna be smoked.
Well, and so gardening was kind of a gateway drug for me as well. And so if you're into TED Talks, there's a TED Talk. It's fairly old. It's not super popular, but it's called My Subversive and then in brackets Garden Plot. And it's about this guy who started gardening and how it changed his life, because now he has the new quote unquote problem of, okay, he started gardening, he got active, right? And then he had food. Well, then he learns how to cook, and then he's eating healthier. Oh, and the waste from the food, well, now that's going into his compost. And now he's starting to develop sustainable systems. And so I learned a lot. I really changed my life significantly based off of that one TED Talk, My Subversive Garden Plot. And it was a gateway drug for me into getting into sustainability, to know we do rain catchment, we ride our bikes everywhere, we do all these other things. And like, I don't know, there's a documentary about blue zones. It's on
Love
Netflix.
it. What
Yeah.
a great document. And to me, that documentary is so powerful because not only does he present what each region of the world, the 7 regions of the world that are considered blue zones and why people are living to be centenarians, but he also shows you the overlap with what all of them have in common. And it's really those 5, well, systems, but those 5 things are always on point, right? Their mental health, their emotional health, their physical health, their spiritual health, and their social health. They all have some kind of community, some kind of belief, right? Like my favorite one for whatever reason was the Ikigai people in Japan, and how like they do the same things every single day because that is their Ikigai, that is their purpose in this world. And until that is no longer their purpose, they will continue to live is basically what they believe.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. And so that the episode on Matt Banko's podcast that you're talking, it was the one with Greg Van Dyne, incidentally.
Okay, I thought so. I've been trying to get him, man. We're back and forth in the DMs. I know he's a busy man, and he kind of,
Well, their
you know,
podcast really blew up, and so they're
yeah,
in the
yeah.
stratosphere right now. But he's a good man. He's a good man,
Yeah,
one of
no,
the
I
best
love
out
listening
there.
to Harder Not Smarter, and I love everything, Kevin. Like I told you before we started recording, you three, I took a lot of inspiration for in building what I'm building, and even Kevin in his comments back and forth with those conversations that we've had, he's like use everything, like build your thing with what I'm doing because this is how we as a community get better. And so, yeah, I can't wait to get the opportunity to sit down with them, and then you talk about gardening. This is my new kind of hobby for the mental health kind of things, doing some bonsai. Yeah, man, I don't know what it is. Like after Peru, I came back and I used origami first as a form of meditation, and then when we finally did buy our house here, we started obviously taking care of the place and planting and all kinds of stuff. And I found this affinity for plants. I don't know what it is, but it's so like calming and just like it allows me to be more present.
Yeah, I'm going to show you something. So you showed me yours, I'll show you mine. So this is it's just a piece of quartz crystal. I found it out in my garden incidentally. And so I'm not really like a Reiki guy by any stretch, but I found this out in my garden. And I remember gathering these when I was a little kid, and I saw I was out there, my hands in the dirt, and I grabbed this thing, and rather than tossing it to the side, I brought it in the house, got an old toothbrush, and I got it all shiny and stuff. And I even showed it to my wife, and she laughs about it. She even sent me something off like Instagram or a meme or something that says that, um, you know, it's cute how little kids, bring you shiny rocks that they like. And it's like, well, that's me. But then, so I talked about this a little bit on a podcast I did with Denny Caballero, who, if you don't follow him, you should check him out. So he's a retired Army Green Beret. He's big into breath work, and so he's breath work, psychedelics, and mindfulness coach, all of that good stuff. So I've been on his show as well, but we talked a little bit about the crystal and stuff. And I don't know the science behind it. There's probably someone out there who's listening to this who's really smart into Reiki, but I can tell you that I don't do it all the time. But every now and then when I'm sitting here working, it always sits on my desk. Sometimes I'll just put that bad boy on my temple, and you can feel it. And come to find out though, that just like in a quartz watch, that quartz is like a natural battery, so it retains energy. So you put that on there. And I know we're getting into some woo-woo stuff here, but it's like
Dude, no, that's
people
that's
people
that's because
can't
that's what
over
this is about, man.
yeah,
Like the
people
woo-woo
can't overlook
stuff.
it.
Yeah, the woo-woo stuff, man. I Heroic Hearts sending me to Peru. Literally, my post this morning was about this. Today, it's 1 year since I left for that retreat. The retreat was from the 2nd to the 7th of July last year. So I was on a plane headed to Peru this time last year. And reflecting back on all of that, I was very, very not interested in woo woo stuff. And man, I live by all of that now. My latest thing is, and I can't explain it to you. I don't know what it is. I think you'll really appreciate this, but I'll be working throughout the day and just random times of the day. I don't wear socks or shoes. Usually I'm in a tank top and shorts, but I'll just get up, go outside and pace my backyard barefooted to get some grounding in for like 15 minutes. And it's like, man, when I come back to do more work, it's more deep focused work. There's no distractions anymore. And it's not something that I consciously tell myself I'm going to do. I don't set a timer for it. It's just like my body knows when it's time to get outside and go get in the grass, and yeah, the woo woo stuff. I don't even want to call it woo woo stuff anymore because it's the principles I live my life by now.
Yeah, absolutely. I do the same. I pretty much take a walk. I come downstairs and I get the coffee brewing. I go outside. My wife calls it, "Are you out surveying your land and playing with your plant babies?" And it's like, I am, in fact, right? But she knows, because that's just something I have to do in the morning. It's not like I'm on a schedule. It's like I want to do that. We have the flowers right now. You take that in. I get to see how my plants are doing. Again, to your point, I don't always go barefoot, but sometimes I'll go out there barefoot, and you got to get that grounding as well. But what's really cool though is, like, even with some of like the big mainstream shows now, you have people that are being a little bit more open and talking about this stuff. Like, obviously, Rogan's one of the most curious people on the planet, and with his platform, he's able to normalize some of this stuff for the rest of us. But now you even have the likes of, like, in the veteran celebrity space, you have like Sean Ryan, like,
I
getting.
love so he's my biggest inspiration for everything I'm doing. He's how I started following his podcast. Little backstory, and the audience doesn't know this either. I tore my no, this was I moved to Florida from South Carolina at the end of 2021 when I left the insurance industry because that industry sucks. Sorry for all you insurance people out there, but I did not have the greatest introduction to insurance, and I hated every minute of it. So I gave my wife the opportunity. Like, we moved across the country for me to go explore that. I told her we could go anywhere you want. She decided to come here to Florida. Works for me because I love the beach. But I went back to flight school to finish up CFI. And when I finished commercial, my logbook had got stolen out of my house with a bunch of other crap by some tweakers in Washington. And in that was my logbook. Well, you need those times to take your next check ride, and you can't forge the numbers, you can't do anything. So long story short, I ended up having to wait like 8 months for the FAA to mail me the one piece of paper that I needed. They couldn't even put it on the website for me to download. So while I was doing that, I was in a sod farm cutting grass for $1,000 a week, which actually wasn't a bad deal. And I got to listen to a lot of books and podcasts and really kind of get my mind right for this journey that I'm on now. I just didn't know it at the time. And so I think I found Sean Ryan at like episode 3, and I was hooked because I don't know. I come from the Army, and I looked up to a lot of those guys. I met several of them in person, whatever. And when he sat down with his wife and he talks about the psychedelic journey that he went in with the ibogaine and the 5-MeO, I immediately knew that I had to start seeking it out by any means necessary. And so I really do credit that man with opening my eyes to that whole world and healing in that way. And really, just I credit him with all of it. I'd love to get him on this show to tell his story, and I know he's told it a million times, but for me it inspires a lot of what I talk about. And so much so that after my ayahuasca journey, I came back, I enrolled in the Being True to You course so I can be a psychedelic integration and addiction recovery coach and help others through this incredible transformation.
I've got someone for you that I'm going to connect you with after the show, that I've done a little bit of work with commercially who's in that space. So I'm going to do an introduction after the show. So don't let me forget about that one. But, and Sean is into other stuff too, like the remote viewing stuff. Like that's like the deep meditation and the remote viewing. And then like we're starting to see a lot more things come out too now. Like I don't know if you listen to it's a little bit out there, but like Terrence Howard was on Rogan recently.
Loved it. Loved it,
Yeah.
man. I love anything that shows me challenges the status quo because I just watched a documentary the other night, which doesn't happen very often, but it was about fasting. I'm a active participant in intermittent fasting forever. I'm almost to 1 year complete on it, but that's how I've lost the majority of the weight. That and really paying attention to what I put in my mouth and all the processed crap that we have here. But for a long time I was 20 and 4, and then I got stabilized and I switched it back to 18 and 4. But man, that documentary opened in my mind to, a guy had wasn't pancreatic cancer, it was colon cancer. He fasted for 21 days. His cancer's gone, completely gone. A woman who was a child in a third world country, got a tattoo on her face, contracted hepatitis C. She did a 21-day fast, had her blood pulled. She was concerned about hepatitis C. Dude told her, like, no hepatitis C, it's gone, completely cured, completely cured. IBS cured through fasting, right? Like, so many different benefits to fasting. It's why has this been kept a secret from us?
Well, the fasting and like the stuff with like the frequencies and like using different frequencies, like there are even theories now like around ancient civilizations and saying that like maybe frequencies were what were used to like move stones for the pyramids and stuff because we grew up learning about, well, they must have had these clay things and use levers and whatever. It's like, yeah, but I don't even think we could do that now, and they get the tolerances so tight. It's like there was something else out there. There's something else, that wisdom that was lost to history, and we're just trying to explain it away. It's like instead of just trying to explain it away with maybe our limited logic, it's like let's explore those things and see what we can't find. And so it's good when these larger platforms are willing to at least have the conversation about it, so that it can normalize it enough so that we can think about it and you don't have to be a complete weirdo to ask questions or think about things.
And Tyler, I'll tell you, man, just in the limited amount that I talked about it on this show, because I don't feel like, the point of this show is not to push people to psychedelics. In fact, I'm against that. I don't think psychedelics are for everybody. I think plant medicine is something to be respected, but I believe in it. I'm passionate about it. I love it that much. And like it's incredible, and I think it should be shared with everybody. And the people come to me and they're curious about it now because I'm willing to talk about it, right? Like I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to tell you that, yeah, you should absolutely go do this. In fact, I'm going to tell you the opposite. The medicine will call you when it's your turn to go do it. But you're right. You're absolutely right. Like, giving a voice, willing to have the conversation, because I don't know everything about plant medicine, and I don't think anybody ever will. But I've met incredible people. I now have a mentor who's going through and training to be a medicine man. I've got an open invitation to go to Colombia, sit down with him for as long as I want. All I have to do is pay my airfare, sit with his taitas, and actually learn about this, all because I was willing to talk about my experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Do you follow Jake Houston? Do you follow Jake Houston? I think I'm saying his name right, but he was I'll make sure I get the name right after the show. But so he's a guy that's been in my LinkedIn network for a while, but he was like a finance guy and a whiz kid up in Canada, was making, multi six figures at a young age, and he just sacked it. And now he's down in Peru and he's set up a jungle retreat. People can go out there, work remotely. He's doing stuff with ayahuasca and all these other things. But and I mean, I really appreciate that, he found it seems like the light bulb went off for him early. I would say that for me it was a little bit later. So like for me, the light bulb went off for me when I was like in my mid 30s, to be quite honest with you. And I would say that really my drug more than anything else, at least at this point, has been the mountains, right? And So I was like 36 years old. I didn't know anything about climbing mountains. And, I'm up here in Minneapolis. I won't say the Northwoods, but Minnesota's the Northwoods, right? But so we don't have like immediate mountains, but a lot of outdoor stuff to do. But, you know, I ended up being in a situation where a friend of mine said that they dreamed about climbing a mountain. We were in an MRT class, in fact, when they were going over what are your dreams, and the guy said, "Well, I want to climb a mountain someday." And I left that drill weekend or whatever, and I've told this story before, but so I left that drill weekend, and well, I was just thinking to myself, it's like, well, I felt like it was a someday that wasn't going to happen, and I cared about this guy. And at the time, I was super focused on corporate stuff. I was traveling a lot as a management consultant. I was happy with my job, making good money or whatever, but I had no hobbies. I wasn't gardening yet. I wasn't doing a lot of stuff yet. And so I started organizing this trip. And we eventually went out and we went to Colorado and climbed, not super technical, but second highest peak in the lower 48. And so him and another guy, we went out and climbed it. And then afterwards, when we were getting ready to leave Leadville, Colorado, we were eating a burrito on Main Street or whatever. And he's like, it's always been my dream to climb a mountain. I look at him, I said, no shit, man. That's why we're here. And it's just like, boom, like he got it, right? And that made me feel so good. And it's like, I just did this thing for this guy, but I can do these things for myself too. And I happen to like climbing. So I started doing that. And then I'm gardening. Then I'm doing all these other things. And, even now, like I've gotten to a point where even within like professional circles, of course, I won't say I don't care what anyone thinks about me. Of course, I care what colleagues think of me and I want to be accepted and I need to make a living like anyone else. But in some respects, I've stuck up two middle fingers to the stuff that's just nonsense of pretend professionalism or pretend, we're great colleagues until, you don't need something from me and then we're not. So, and I call a lot of that stuff out. So that's why I'm pretty direct and open about things now. It's like, and I don't care what you think. You can try and cancel me, but I'm not going anywhere because life's too short. It's like, we can live better than we're living, and we can work better than we're working, and we can professional better than we're professionaling too.
Yeah, man. No, and I totally agree. You're absolutely right. I think why the mountains are your drug is because part of my experience when I was in the high jungle in Peru, in the medicine, I actually got to hear and feel and kind of see the color of the vibration that the mountains, exist at, and what a cool experience that was. So I know that there's a reason that that's what you're drawn to. You probably vibrate at the same frequency as mountains, so it makes perfect sense that's your drug. And that's kind of a good segue into how has that stuff, because you said you were happy with your job, you really enjoyed the corporate job. If that company still existed, you would not be here having this conversation with me. You wouldn't have started your own thing. But because you now garden, you climb mountains, you mess with plants, all of that good stuff, how has that actually helped your business?
So a couple of things that it did, because I started climbing before I left that organization that I was pretty happy with. Prior to having that experience and helping my friend turn a someday was never going to happen into a someday it happened, right? And then it hit him. Oh, there's a reason that this happened, right? Because someone helped me make it happen. And hopefully he passes that along. He still climbs now too. So, and he's sharing that with his boys and stuff like that. But I wasn't the best professional I could be before I was climbing. As far as, yes, I could go into a Fortune 500 boardroom. I can pitch without stumbling over myself. I was tactically and technically proficient and strategically proficient, to use military terms. But my identity, like a lot of people get tied to their military identity, a lot of my identity was tied to what my station and position was within that organization. So like a VP position came up and they offered it to someone who I knew I could run circles around, but maybe they're a little older, maybe something else. And then so when I don't get that, then what do? I get pissed, right? And I'm not going to sandbag, but it makes me, well, F them or whatever, and I'm better. But then it starts to make you bitter, and it makes you competitive with people in not a good way. And it starts to make you resentful, and it just kind of starts to not be the right thing. And when I had that climbing experience and then started climbing more complex stuff and then started branching out into these other hobbies, I wasn't as tied to professional setbacks. Like if I didn't get the client that I wanted to get, or if I didn't get the promotion, it didn't weigh so heavy in my quotient. Was I disappointed because I wanted to be a VP but I was a kid, or whatever, and you got to give it to the 45-year-old instead of the 36-year-old or whatever. It's like, yeah, maybe a little bit, but it's like that's rolling off my back because I was still making good money. I was still moving forward professionally. I was still reasonably happy with my job. So what about that? Because I had other outlets of things to do. And again, we were talking about it before with like the social media sphere that adds to it. It's like all this stuff can line up. Um, you know, 3 years ago in the security industry is very good at what I did. 4 or 5 years ago, maybe is a little bit better way to put it now. But, I was very good at what I did, good clients, knew how to do all of the stuff I needed to do within my role, but nobody knew who I was. So it's the pandemic. The kid in my 40s or just turned 40, I think, started posting on LinkedIn, posting some project management stuff, some security, and then also some wacky gardening stuff. And I'm going to go out and run on a hill and I'm going to post that. And I'm wearing short shorts and all these other things. Pretty soon, everybody knows who I am.
Yeah, man.
And now
I
I
know
have,
who you are. That's how
well,
it's for one of the first people I found, man.
Well, but it leads to because it creates access, and for me, it's not an act. It's like this is just how I live. If I have to go do stuff I don't want to do for content's sake, I don't want to do it, and that'll be the day that I stop. My content is really just how I live, and it's my life. And if you don't like it, don't like it. If you call me unprofessional, you don't have to work with me. But guess what? I'm more interesting now in the ether than a lot of those folks. And there are folks like even in the security industry that came up in the traditional way. It's like, these are the power players, these are the gatekeepers. And then there's, to be a kid in my late 30s or 40s, which is preposterous to me. But it's like, I basically democratize your own path. It's like, well, they can't deny you now because now you're interesting. Now I'm writing articles and I'm getting published in security journals. And it's not because I'm old guy in suit. It's because I came out as my I came out as myself and now I'm memorable. And it's not that it's this man. I'm not the liver king saying I'm I'm primitive but I'm on steroids. I'm just doing what I'm doing. And if you like it, you like it. And if you don't, you don't. But that creates access. So even now it's like, I have opportunities to be like an equity partner in startups and things like that. And I didn't have to fake it at all. Like everyone knows what it is. So the people that reach out to me are the people who kind of know what the score is, and I don't have to fake it.
Dude, I love that. I love that so much because that's what I've adopted as my content style. All of my content as of late, unless I'm promoting the podcast or the launch of the community, it's my morning walk videos. I just talk about that's my time to work out through my shit in my head, whatever's ailing me, whatever I have to deal with, whatever that ends up being what my message that morning is. Sometimes it's nothing. I did it last week. It didn't do very well. Thanks, LinkedIn. Fuck you. But
LinkedIn's been
it
rough lately, man. So
it's been rough. It's been
real
rough for
rough.
sure. But I think what you're speaking to in social media and building, let's be honest, it's a personal brand because it's what it is. What people crave in 2024 is you have 17,000 followers. I know that doesn't sound impressive. For LinkedIn, that's impressive, right? It's not 160,000 on Instagram or whatever, but LinkedIn, that's a lot of followers. And I've worked my ass off to get the 2,700 that I have. I started at 93, less than a year ago. But what it is people, they put like this label on people with lots of followers and they think that you're not accessible and you're not authentic and you're not genuine. And your content, my content to this day is the antithesis of that. It's very much who I am. I'm in a muscle tank and short shorts with my partnership Gray Group Tactical X Fit vest on with 20 pounds in it. And I'm just holding a phone and walking and talking with my dogs. That's it. That's every day. And it makes me relatable. It makes me seem human. I talk about the things that ail me, not just, giving advice to veterans who seek my counsel and mentorship. I even get comments on my stuff like, it's so nice to know that you practice exactly what you're telling me to practice to get better. It's good to see you leading by example. And man, absolutely. Like, I think you're probably, whether I realize it or not, the inspiration for where my content has ended up because I watched so much of your content.
Well, I'm glad I could be a small part of that, but I'll tell you that I'm glad the platform has changed the way that it has, and I think it's the same way that the ether of like podcasts and the other platforms has changed too. It's like being authentic is such a terrible word because I think it's been bastardized, right? And so I kind of shy away from just be authentic. In fact, I make fun of just be consistent, just be authentic because
I know.
no,
I'm sorry, but that's
no, but like
genuinely what it is.
real authenticity though, like it's not talking about it, it's about being about it, right? And so I can tell you that like when I first came to LinkedIn, and the only reason I was 17,000 followers is because it wasn't because I was terribly unique. It's because I got here early, but I didn't know any better. I kind of posted on LinkedIn like it was Instagram. and I was breaking a bunch of rules and catching a lot of crap for it. I mean, I was posting pictures of my backyard before Justin Welsh was even doing clip art. He was just doing the 3-line hook or the 3-word hook, 3-line body, 3-line call to action, and be rich like me, and it's like, but when Justin's good, like Justin was a visionary and he started super early, so all props to him. But I remember like I posted like a picture of my backyard. No one was doing, and I was doing some really far out stuff with pictures of rabbits and all sorts of things. And then I remember Justin Welsh posted a picture of his backyard, and I saw in the comments someone's like, "Oh, changing it up, huh?" And he said, "Yeah, you got to evolve." And I just kind of smiled to myself. Whether or not he saw mine, I don't know. But here's little me that's not important, and I'm not making multiple 6 figures every 10 minutes like everyone else on LinkedIn is. But it's like, I bet that dude saw my backyard and thought about that. Right. And so whether that's true or not, but you never know what those impacts are going, those impacts you can have on people. And you can cast a big shadow into the world, so you have to be careful how you stand up and what your posture is and what you're going to share with people, because you can affect them negatively or you can affect them positively. And it's interesting that you even talk about network size, because like we were talking about before we started recording, I'm in the process of doing deep cuts and I hope to be around 8,000 within the next few
For
weeks,
sure.
honestly.
I mean, it's not really like, I don't really care about the vanity metrics, right? Like, I think to an extent, if you're building a personal brand, you need to care because it informs, if your messaging is hitting, if you're talking to your audience the right way or whatever. But, I even admitted this to you. I was like, for a while, I wanted to reach out to you and ask you to come on this podcast. And I finally shot my shot in your comments one day and you're like, just say when, we'll make it happen. And I don't know why I was so afraid to reach out to you. And I do think it's because of that number, because I looked at it as maybe like, I don't have anything to offer you. You've clearly gotten to where you're at doing what you do. Like, there's no benefit for you to come on this no-name show that nobody knows about and have a conversation with a guy you've never met. And that couldn't be further from the case. You're like, I'm easy. I love doing stuff like this, right?
I was stoked. I was stoked to get the invite. Now we're just these two beautiful men with our long hair and our talking about stuff. Exactly.
No, man, and I do. I'm so grateful that you said yes, and I'm so grateful that like this conversation we've talked about like everything, right? Like all the things that make us who we are, and just my last kind of comment on the content piece. I think, you know, talking about the things that we're doing and going about it the way that we're going about it, that's the future. I don't remember where I read this, but it wasn't too long ago. Some bigger creator out there who I do believe has put in the work and is making the money, because I don't believe all the content creators who say that they're making 30, 40, $50,000 a month doing what they're doing are actually making. Yeah, right. Like I don't think that they're actually doing that, but I know this guy has put in his dues and he really is making some serious money. But he said, 2024 and beyond, mainly the last half of 2024 and beyond, what society is going to demand is authenticity and genuine people like you and I who aren't afraid to say the quiet parts out loud, or very much like, I guess the approach I'm taking is just a building in public. Like, I know building a digital business is possible. I know that that's possible, particularly now because I started this podcast. It's made $10, I think, but I actually made money. If I can make $10, I can make $10,000 doing it. Right. And so I've seen it work, but like, if I just put out what I'm going through for people to follow, like, that's as good of a roadmap as you can get. This is what I did today. This is what I did yesterday. This is how I'm approaching this. Like, give people the actual roadmap and not just try to sell them your fucking product.
Yeah, or put everything behind a paywall, and maybe there's nothing even behind the paywall. That's kind of the gross part of it. But and I used to rage against the machine on some of that stuff a lot harder, but I've let some of that go. So even though I've gone to the paint a little bit in the last few days, like the one was kind of a whim, and then I just felt like I should do a follow up to it. But for anyone who's listening, I kind of did a little bit of a call out on like pod influencers. I wasn't calling anyone out specifically, but just to the extent of how it makes me feel and how it makes people feel. It's like, it's like, I feel like we're out here. Most of us are doing it the right way, and we're within the terms and conditions and trying to be legal, moral, ethical about it. And it's like we're competing clean in a dirty sport. And so it's really kind of even more of a call out to the platform. It's like, if you really want to get people interested, we don't want games. We don't need a templates feature. Take care of the pods. Take care of that. Let it be even playing field, and let the cards fall where they may. So, but yeah, I guess my point is that although sometimes I still will say the quiet parts out loud, I'm not so targeting like, these people are lying and they're predatory or whatever else. It's purely just, some of this, the math doesn't math on it. And I want other people to know that it's not mathing for me as well, because, you're sitting here watching me thinking I must have it going on and I'm floating at this. It's like, I'm just out here struggling myself, man. It's like, we're all just people out here struggling.
Yeah, yeah, and the vast majority of even guys like yourself, people who come on the show, it's the same story. They all feel the same way, and that's to my point about content. Like, that day, you called no one in specific out, and the people who are going to take offense to that are the guilty parties, and they know it. And I'm not afraid to sit here and actually call them out for that, because that's you are the problem. If you took offense to Tyler's post, that you might want to go look yourself in the mirror. But then, like, your post yesterday was actually about project management. And I even commented on it. I was like, that's the 5 P's. That's it. Proper planning prevents piss poor performance. Like, and that's just an example of like the gamut that you can run your content when you know your audience. You know what I mean? Because people very much needed to hear that about the engagement pods, because we're all feeling it. It's just you took the liberty to stand up and say something about it. And I hope that did well for you. I hope that kind of boosted back up the numbers for you a little bit.
I think I'm probably, it's still climbing, but I think I'm around 7,000 on it. I don't think the platform's real jazzed about those, but I think those are the ones that the platform can't even overpower that. It's like,
Of course,
some of
because
this
it's the
stuff strikes
truth.
a chord, right? And
Yeah, for
like,
sure.
it's like, I know this stuff's not easy to sniff out, but it's like, you're LinkedIn, you've got smart people, you're owned by Microsoft. I know they could solve this if they wanted to.
Yeah, they don't want to, right? What are the future plans for Winsley? And I know you have something going on. I shouldn't even bring it up because you can't talk about it, but I know there's some bigger plans in your future. So what does the future look like for Tyler?
So for Winsley, I'm actually refocusing a little bit because I started this and it was still in kind of the heyday of coaching slash consulting. But I'll tell you that it's never really been like a revenue driver for me on the coaching side necessarily. It's more the traditional B2B stuff is just been better for me as far from a business perspective. So I'll still do like some executive coaching as kind of like a secondary service, but I'm not going to market anyone. And I'll even share with you that, as I was going through and starting to purge my network, and I see all of the coaches who I help with word salad. it made me realize how much, and it's kind of made
I'm
up
with I'm with you. I'm
how
with you
much
because I
kind of
started thinking I wanted to be a coach, and then as you continue this journey, and this is words of advice for those of you wanting to be coaches. I don't think there's anything wrong with coaching, but it's a kind of a dead end. I
it's
mean,
very
like
it's extremely saturated, and one, it's very saturated, and it's, I'm sure there's some wonderful coaches who have a very focused offering and they have some real methodology, and there's a lot of smoke and mirrors out there as well. And I know what I can coach for, but it's so much that I'm not even marketing it anymore. So I've actually gone through the process of kind of changing up some of my marketing collateral and stuff like that, and really just focus on the consultancy where I have the case studies of stuff that I do. And you know, I'm not in the group that's made $600 trillion in my first 6 months through LinkedIn and my consulting offering, but I'm ahead of my projections, which were very conservative for first year revenue, and it's profitable. I bought a new laptop. I bought some office equipment. I have some subscriptions for, Zoom, this and that, and the other that probably cost me all of about $30 a month all. And it's like, I'm still in the black, so I'm good. Right. And because we planned for this, so I'm going to continue to incrementally grow it. And then, to your point, I can't talk about it a lot, but I am working on kind of an exciting spinoff that's a little bit more in the defense space. That's a very tangible product, to potentially help, some of our war fighters in the best possible way. So fingers crossed on that. And eventually, hopefully I can do a release on that and say, here's what me and my partners are doing. And so that'll be kind of a, separate from what I do with Winsley, but and really, even for folks who are listening, I was chatting with someone about this the other day. Like, if like you're a senior NCO or an officer that's getting out of the military or something, and even if you don't know what you want to do when you grow up, there's probably someone somewhere that wants your expertise or some advice for you or something like that. In most states, an LLC might cost you $100 or $200 to get it set up. And if you have that, you have a legal entity to do some business, rather than, well, I'd help you with that, but how do I even do it? Figure that stuff out, because it doesn't cost that much to have an LLC if you have something that's consultable, and then your business entity is already set up. And maybe you only make $12 off it. You don't have to go out and get QuickBooks and all that. But if you have the legal entity, you're set up for your taxes and all that stuff. Why not? That's kind of part of staying. That's like an administrative component for an entrepreneur of staying capable. If you have a general use professional services consulting LLC, you never know when someone might need some help with something. And not to say that you need to charge everyone for everything that you do. I do a lot of stuff for free,
I
or
do everything for free. Everything. It's ridiculous. Like I'm people are getting so mad at me. They're like, you need to start charging. I'm like, I can't. Like I can't let myself charge other veterans for knowledge that I had to seek out when I could just give it to them. To your point, like get an LLC. I took the lazy way because I didn't feel like trudging through the state's paperwork. I paid busy $300. 7 Day Shake Consulting LLC was born in 2020, and now I'm an SDVOB. I can take government contracts. Like there's a really easy route for you getting out of the Army, the Navy, the Marines, whatever, to become just an LLC that takes government contracts. I have a guy in my network that can walk you through his program. He'll give you access to some Fortune 500 contracting stuff. Like there's a way out here. I promise.
Yeah, and like, don't sweat the website either. Like, people think, oh, I have to have a $5,000 or $10,000 website. You really don't. You can have a social media page that's attached to your Facebook or your LinkedIn or whatever. I just got a website here in the last couple of months, and I was operating just based off a LinkedIn page before that. But like, slowly you add that stuff on, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. I use Card, and so I've got my own multimedia page where all my podcasts sit, but then I've got my company page, and I think it cost me like $17 for the year. It's like, come on, right? Don't get overwhelmed, and you don't need to have it all at once. You don't need to have $100,000 accounting system and all that stuff. You'll figure it out as you go.
Well, and the one non-negotiable is you need a list. You need an email list, period. From the beginning, start an email list because, to your point, Facebook pages, LinkedIn, well, we're feeling that pain right now. That's rented traffic. That's not traffic that you own. So start your list early. I wish I hear it all the time. I wish I would have started earlier. I'm pretty sure you do too. Yeah, man. Any advice you want to leave veterans with before we get you out of here? I've taken a whole bunch of your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I know that we could probably go for another hour and a half if we continue going like this.
We'll have to do a part 2 sometime, maybe after this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Second thing works out, I'll come on and, I can reach out into your vast network then and just spam my stuff out and buy my stuff. And
by all means, brother, I'd be happy to do that for you, man.
But don't get overwhelmed with the big stuff. Just take it in incremental steps, whether it's solopreneurship or the, military transition or whatever. Just take it one day at a time. I know that's kind of cliche, but the reality is no matter when the people you look out to or look up to, no matter how much you think they've got all their shit together, they're just as big a train wreck as you are right now.
Probably bigger. Yeah. Because as you grow, the problems get more convoluted and more difficult to deal with, and you're out of your element. You don't know. You've never done this before. So
you get smart enough to know how much you don't know. Like I was in my 20s, I had it all figured out. By my 30s, I was questioning myself, and now in my 40s, I'm smart enough to know I don't know what the hell is going on.
Yeah, every time, man. Tell everybody where they can find you, how they can get in touch with you if they're looking for any of your services, whether that be coaching or security, consulting, any of that good stuff.
Sure. So pretty easy to find on LinkedIn, of course. I also have an Instagram. I've started pushing stuff out there for omni-channel sake. I'm not big by any stretch, but I'm just there. My handle's Tyler_Schmoker. So that one's easy enough. And then my website is WinsleyLLC.com. That's Winsley, WINSLY, not EY.
Dude, Tyler, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your incredible journey. I appreciate the conversation. Everybody, please don't forget to go like, rate, review, subscribe, download, and share this with everybody in your network. Help me reach my goal of getting this in front of 1 million veterans before I turn 40 on May 9th, 2025. I say it every time. It's a lofty goal, but if there's one community on this planet that can do it, it's the veteran community. And I would love for you guys to help me get there. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Tyler Schmoker. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. That's our show, and I'm truly thankful you've joined us at The Strategic Veteran. If our conversation today sparked curiosity, or if you're ready to elevate your game, I'm here to help. Visit thestrategicveteran.com for exclusive show notes and resources, or to book a coaching session directly with me. Take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and share your review. Your support makes all the difference. For more insights and daily strategies, let's connect on LinkedIn and keep the conversation going. Remember, this isn't just a podcast, it's your strategic advantage in action. Until our next rendezvous, stay bold and continue the mission.